the far reaches of the galaxy, where the stars shimmered like 1,000 diamonds against the deep black canvas of space, a mighty empire stretched across countless planets. At its heart was a glittering city, the capital, built upon centuries of power, secrets, and political webs that had trapped both rulers and the ruled. The empire was in turmoil, and even the most powerful were struggling to hold on to control. In this high-tech, imperial city, hidden beneath towering buildings and bustling streets, a human named Ben walked unnoticed among the alien crowds. He wasn't a soldier or a noble. He was a technician, assigned to work in the imperial palace under the cover of his assignment as a mechanic. Ben had seen the palace's secrets, the ones most were unaware of, and he wasn't sure if that made him a lucky man or a doomed one. The last few months had been hard on him. He had watched the rising tensions within the empire, the struggles between factions, the power plays, and the ruthless leaders who had no care for the people. Ben had always been the type to stay out of politics, but what he witnessed in the palace changed his mind. The corruption, the lies, the way those in charge treated the lower classes. It all made him feel sick. He had come here to fix machines and systems, not to get involved in rebellion or assassination plots. But fate had different plans. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the city, Ben found himself walking through a less familiar corridor, deep inside the palace. He had been sent to inspect a malfunctioning generator, something routine. But as he passed through the dimly lit hallways, he felt a sudden shift in the air. It was as though the walls themselves were watching him, listening. He moved quickly, checking his tools, hoping to get to the generator and finish the job without drawing attention. But fate had other plans. As he reached the access panel, he heard footsteps approaching. The sound was quiet but unmistakable, and it wasn't just one person. It was several. Ben froze, his heart racing. He didn't want to be caught here, especially not in such a sensitive part of the palace. He quickly ducked behind a nearby column, hoping they wouldn't see him. Through the shadows, he caught sight of the figures. At first, he thought it was just another group of guards, but something was different about them. They weren't wearing standard military uniforms. They wore the cloaks of high-ranking officials. Ben's eyes widened as he recognized one of the figures. The princess. Princess Lyra. She was not like the others in the palace. Not in the way she carried herself, not in the way her presence seemed to command the space. Lyra was young, but she possessed a sharp intelligence that even those older than her feared. Rumors surrounded her, of her secret political ambitions, of how she longed to break free from the suffocating traditions of her family. But there was more than just ambition in her eyes as she moved swiftly through the palace halls. There was something deeper, something Ben could sense even from the distance. Ben's breath caught in his throat as he watched her, surrounded by a small group of loyal aides, heading towards a set of heavy doors at the end of the hallway. He instinctively stepped back, pressing himself against the wall to stay hidden. But it was too late. One of her aides spotted him, a sharp glance that immediately made Ben realize he was no longer alone. Before Ben could make a move, Princess Lyra turned, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The princess's gaze wasn't one of anger, but one of silent understanding. She knew exactly who Ben was, and he knew who she was. They had crossed paths before, though briefly, at state functions and during official gatherings. She had always been in the background, observing everything with quiet calculation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice calm yet authoritative. Ben opened his mouth, unsure of how to respond.
I was sent to fix the generator," he said quickly, trying to explain himself without revealing too much. The princess studied him for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully.
"You're lying." Ben blinked. "What?" "You're not here just to fix the generator," she said, her tone softening slightly.
"You've seen things, haven't you? Things you weren't supposed to see?" She took a step closer, her presence suddenly much more commanding.
"You know the palace has secrets. You've been watching, haven't you?"
Ben swallowed hard. How much did she know? Was it possible she knew everything?
I don't know what you mean,
he stammered, but he knew she could see through him. There was no use lying. Lyra's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. I think you and I have a lot in common, more than you might realize. The princess, someone who had lived her entire life in luxury and privilege, thought she had anything in common with him? She was the symbol of everything he despised: wealth, power, and control. But here, now, with her eyes locked, he sensed there was something more to her. I know who you are, she continued. I know you've seen things. Things that would get you killed if you were to speak of them. But I can offer you a choice.
You can keep your silence, keep your head down, and stay safe. Or
you... Ben blinked. Help her? With what? She seemed to read his thoughts, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. I'm trying to escape, Ben. I don't want to be a part of this palace any longer. I want to change things. But I need someone who isn't afraid of the truth.
Ben's mind raced.
Escape? Change things?
Was she serious?
I don't know if I can help you, he said, his voice uncertain. I'm just a technician. I don't know anything about politics or... Politics are why the Empire is falling apart, she interrupted gently.
What I need from you is simple. Help me escape.
You know the palace, the systems, the roots. You have the skills to get us out of here. Ben hesitated. He had no desire to get involved in something so dangerous, especially with someone like Princess Lyra. But at the same time, something in her words resonated with him. He didn't know if it was hope, desperation, or something else entirely. But he couldn't shake the feeling that helping her was the right thing to do. What's in it for me? He asked cautiously. Lyra's gaze held his for a long moment, and then she spoke, with quiet conviction. Freedom. For both of us. It was the promise of freedom that changed everything. Ben knew the risks. He knew the Empire would not take kindly to someone like him helping a runaway princess. But there was something about Lyra's determination that stirred something deep inside him, something that had been dormant for too long. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had a choice. He could continue living his life as a cog in the machine, or take a chance on something far greater. I'll help you, he said finally, his voice steady. Lyra smiled, but it was a smile full of purpose, of something much deeper than just gratitude. Good. We leave tonight. Ben didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change forever. The Empire he had once been so removed from, the palace that had seemed so distant and untouchable, was now in his hands. They would face danger, enemies, and the unknown. But there was no turning back. That night, as the city hummed with its usual routine, Ben and Princess Lyra would set in motion a plan that would shake the foundation of the Empire itself. Together, they would change the future. But first, they had to escape. As the night descended over the sprawling city, a quiet unease seemed to settle over the palace. Ben, and now fully involved in the secretive mission to help Princess Lyra escape, could feel the weight of the danger growing with each passing moment. The grand structure of the palace loomed above them, dark and silent, as if it too understood the gravity of what was about to happen. They had only hours before the first light of dawn, when the palace would come alive again, and the princess would be trapped once more. Ben met Lyra in the shadow of an old archway, where the cold stone walls offered them cover from prying eyes. Her expression was calm, but Ben could see the determination in her eyes. She was ready to move, ready to fight for her freedom. The plans had been made. The escape routes were mapped out, and all the necessary preparations had been carried out in secret.
We leave now, Lyra whispered, her voice barely more than a breath against the stillness of the night.
The palace is most vulnerable just before dawn.
If we move quickly, we might be able to slip past the guards before the shift change. Ben nodded, his heart racing. His hands were slick with sweat, but he focused on the task at hand. He had been involved in risky operations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about breaking into a secure area or fixing a broken system. It was about helping the most powerful woman in the Empire escape from her own family's grasp. It was about giving her a chance to rewrite the fate of the galaxy. He followed Lyra closely as she moved with quiet grace, her movements sharp and purposeful. The princess knew the palace like the back of her hand, her every step calculated and deliberate. Ben had to admit he was impressed. In all the time he'd worked in the palace, he had never once suspected that a royal figure like her could be so resourceful. They moved through narrow corridors, past ornate statues and glittering windows that offered glimpses of the city below. The place felt different now, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Every footstep seemed amplified in the silence, and the hum of the palace's massive power generators echoed in the distance. It was a cold reminder of the Empire's overwhelming presence. Lyra paused briefly at a hidden door, one that Ben hadn't noticed before. She pressed a hidden panel in the wall, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open to reveal a dimly lit passage. This was their route out. "This way," Lyra urged, motioning for Ben to follow her. "It leads to the old service tunnels."
"They're rarely used anymore, but they should give us enough cover." Ben followed without hesitation, his eyes scanning the shadows as they made their way deeper into the tunnel. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old machinery. It felt like they were walking through a forgotten part of the palace, a place where time itself seemed to have stood still. The walls were lined with rusted pipes and aging conduits, remnants of the Empire's once mighty infrastructure. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps the only sound in the oppressive darkness. Ben's mind was racing. What would happen if they were caught? What if someone discovered their plan? The thought of failure seemed almost unbearable, but Lyra didn't seem worried at all. She walked with confidence, as though she had done this 100 times before. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally reached a small metal door. Lyra placed her hand on the control panel beside it, and with a soft click, the door opened to reveal a narrow staircase that led up to the surface. They were close now. Lyra turned to Ben, her eyes locking with his. "This is it," she said quietly. "We go up from here." Ben nodded, his throat dry. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the point of no return. If they were caught now, there would be no escaping the consequences. But there was something in Lyra's eyes, a quiet certainty, that gave him the courage to move forward. They climbed the staircase in silence, each step bringing them closer to freedom. The final door loomed ahead of them, a thick metal barrier that separated the palace from the outside world. Lyra tapped a few codes into the control panel, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped out into the cool night air, the stars above them a vast expanse of untapped potential. For a moment, Ben simply stood there, taking in the view. The city below was a sea of light stretching far and wide, a reminder of the Empire's might. But in that moment, he didn't feel small. He felt alive. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Lyra, however, didn't pause. She was already moving, her pace quickening as she made her way towards the edge of the palace grounds. Ben followed her closely, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea where they were going, but he trusted her. He had to. They reached a hidden courtyard at the back of the palace, a small, isolated area surrounded by high walls. There, waiting for them, was a small shuttle, its engines humming quietly in the background. It was an old, battered ship, but it would do the job. Lyra had arranged for it in advance, using the network of allies she had carefully cultivated over the years. Now, it was their ticket out of the Empire. Ben glanced at Lyra as she stepped towards the shuttle, her expression unreadable. This was it. They were about to leave everything behind, the palace, the Empire, and everything that had once defined their lives. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "We're almost there," she said, her voice steady. "Once we're off the ground, we can make our next move.
The Empire will never know what hit them. Ben couldn't help but smile. There was something about her words, about her unwavering confidence, that filled him with hope. They were no longer just running away. They were taking control of their fate and the galaxy itself.
He nodded and followed her into the shuttle, feeling the weight of their mission settle on his shoulders.
As the doors closed behind them, the shuttle's engines roared to life, and they began to ascend into the sky, leaving the palace and the Empire behind. But as the shuttle climbed higher and higher, the stars glittering in the distance, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced out the small viewport, but there was nothing. The night was clear, and the city below was nothing more than a fading blur. "Do you think we'll make it?" Ben asked quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Lyra was already at the controls, her fingers flying over the ship's console. She didn't look up, but her voice was calm. "We have no choice but to make it." Ben couldn't argue with that. They were in this together now, and there was no turning back. The shuttle soared through the sky, cutting through the atmosphere and into the vastness of space. Ben looked out the viewport one last time, the lights of the city below now just a distant memory. The galaxy stretched out before them, an endless expanse of possibilities, and for the first time in his life, Ben felt the weight of the future lift from his shoulders. He wasn't just a technician anymore. He was part of something far greater, a rebellion, a movement that could change the course of history. And as the shuttle shot into the stars, Ben realized that they were just getting started. The journey from the palace was tense. The stars outside the shuttle's viewport glittered like scattered diamonds, but Ben's mind wasn't focused on the beauty of space. Every passing moment made him feel as though they were getting closer to something bigger than they had expected. He glanced over at Princess Lyra, who was sitting at the controls, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard. She looked calm, almost detached, as though the escape was just another part of her carefully laid plan. But Ben could feel the weight of her decision. He could see it in the way her fingers moved so deliberately over the ship's console, how her eyes would occasionally scan the starry expanse outside, as if waiting for something to happen. "We're clear for now," Lyra said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Ben could sense an undercurrent of tension beneath her words. "We've evaded the palace's sensors, but it won't take long for them to figure out we're gone. We need to move quickly." He had never been involved in something like this before, never imagined that one day he'd be part of a revolution. His life had always been simple, fixing machines, troubleshooting systems, and avoiding trouble. But now he had crossed into dangerous territory. The princess's escape was just the beginning. The Empire would be hunting them down, and there was no way to go back to the quiet life he once knew. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice low as he took a seat in one of the shuttle's chairs. The small ship hummed steadily, its engines purring as it traveled deeper into space. Lyra's eyes flicked to him briefly, before returning to the console.
"We need to regroup with the Loyalists," she said, her tone direct. "There's a group of senators and military leaders who oppose the current regime."
"They're hiding out on a remote moon on the outskirts of the galaxy. If we can unite with them, we'll have the strength to make a move against the Council." Ben leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Loyalists?" "I thought they were all just rumors." "They're real," Lyra replied, her voice firm.
"I've been working with them in secret for months. They're not all in the Council's pocket."
"Some of them want change, want a new empire, one that doesn't oppress the lower classes."
"They'll help us."
Ben was quiet for a moment. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving deeper into unknown territory, into a fight that would take more than just their escape to win. But Lyra seemed so sure, so certain of the people she had been working with. If she believed they could succeed, then perhaps he could too.
"How long will it take to get there?"
Ben asked. "A few days," Lyra answered.
"But we can't afford to be complacent. Once we make contact with the Loyalists, we'll need to act fast."
"The Council will come after us, and they won't stop until they found us."
Ben nodded, his mind working through the plan.
It was clear that Lyra had been thinking about this for a long time. She wasn't acting out of impulse. She had a vision, a strategy. He realized just how much she had planned for this moment, how much she had prepared for the risks ahead. She wasn't just running from the Empire, she was preparing to fight it. The shuttle continued to soar through the quiet expanse of space, leaving the Empire behind. As the hours passed, Ben tried to sleep, but found himself unable to. His mind kept racing with thoughts of what awaited them. Was he ready for this? Was he ready to help Lyra take down the Council? He had always been a fixer, a problem solver. But this was different. This was a revolution. Lyra's calmness was both reassuring and unsettling. She had been trained for this, but Ben was just a man who had been thrust into a situation far beyond his understanding. The weight of what they were doing was starting to sink in. Eventually, after what felt like days but was only a few hours, Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We're approaching the moon." Ben's heart raced as he looked out the viewport. A small, rocky moon appeared on the horizon, far from any trade routes or populated systems. It was desolate, an ideal place to hide from the watchful eyes of the Council. As they descended into the atmosphere, the surface of the moon came into sharper focus. It was barren, with only craggy mountains and vast plains stretching as far as the eye could see. No signs of life, no buildings, nothing but the harsh landscape. It was the perfect place to disappear, to regroup without drawing attention.
"Once we land, we'll have to move quickly," Lyra said, her voice steady as always. "The Loyalists are waiting at an old mining facility.
It's been abandoned for years, but it'll serve as our base of operations." Ben nodded, his nerves tightening. This was it, the next step in their plan. He didn't know what awaited them, but he trusted Lyra. She had a way of making him believe in something bigger than himself. She had already proven that she was a leader, someone who could inspire change. Now, it was up to them to see this through. The shuttle touched down with a soft jolt, and the engines powered down. Lyra unstrapped herself from the pilot's seat and stood, her gaze fixed on the door.
"Stay alert," she said quietly. "We don't know who else is out here." Ben followed her lead, standing and making his way to the hatch.
His pulse quickened as the door slid open, revealing the cold, empty landscape outside. The air was thin, and the temperature was freezing, but it was a necessary sacrifice for the safety of their mission. Lyra led the way, moving with purpose across the rocky terrain. Ben kept close behind, his eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no sign of movement, no signs of life. The Loyalists, it seemed, were the only ones here. They reached the mining facility after a few minutes, the massive building looming ahead. It was a relic from a time long past, a reminder of the Empire's once thriving industrial age. The doors were old and rusted, but they creaked open at Lyra's touch, revealing a dark interior. Inside, a small group of people waited for them. They were a mix of humans and aliens, their clothes worn but practical. They looked up as Lyra entered, their expressions a mix of relief and wariness. It was clear that they had been waiting for her arrival for a long time. Lyra stepped forward, her voice strong as she addressed the group.
"We're here. The Council won't stop coming after us, but we have a chance to make a real change.
Together we can take down the Empire that has oppressed us for so long." The room fell silent as the Loyalists exchanged glances. Ben could feel the weight of the moment settling over them. These were the people who would help them bring about the change Lyra dreamed of. They were the key to their success, and it was up to Lyra to rally them to her cause. After a long pause, one of the Loyalists, a tall, alien man with dark skin and piercing eyes, stepped forward.
"We've been waiting for this," he said, his voice gruff but resolute. "We'll follow you, Princess."
"We'll do what it takes." Lyra nodded, her face hardening with determination.
"Then we begin." Ben watched as the Loyalists gathered around, ready to begin the work of taking down the Council.
This was it. The rebellion was no longer just an idea. It was real. They were on the edge of something huge, something that could change the entire galaxy. But the road ahead would be long, and the risks would only grow greater. As he looked at Lyra, he knew one thing for sure. They weren't just running anymore. They were ready to fight, and the galaxy would never be the same. The underground facility was cold and dark, with only the faint hum of old machinery to break the silence. It was nothing like the palace or the bustling cities Ben had once known. This place was built for secrecy, for safety, and for survival. Lyra had insisted that they make this their new base, and now, after days of planning, it felt like the walls themselves were closing in with the weight of their ambition. Ben stood by one of the windows, looking out over the barren moon. The dark sky stretched endlessly above, dotted with stars that felt so far away. He tried to focus on the horizon, but his thoughts kept returning to the same question. What would they do next? The Loyalists had gathered, and now they were ready to move. But the stakes had only grown higher. The Council would be searching for them. They would stop at nothing to find Lyra, to silence anyone who threatened their hold on power. The Empire was vast, its influence stretching across countless worlds, but it was also fragile. In the right hands, it could be torn apart. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "We need to act, Ben. We can't afford to wait any longer." She stood at the front of the room, surrounded by the Loyalist leaders, her gaze sharp and focused. Despite the uncertainty of their situation, she radiated confidence. The quiet strength that had led her to this moment was undeniable. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader. Ben turned to face her, his heart heavy with the realization that this fight wasn't just hers. It was theirs. They had both chosen this path, and now they had to see it through. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Lyra gave him a brief, appreciative nod before turning back to the others.
"We've spent enough time hiding. It's time to take the fight to the Council."
The Loyalist leaders exchanged looks, murmuring among themselves. Ben could see the tension in the air. It wasn't just fear. It was the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on their shoulders. The idea of confronting the Council, of challenging the very system that had ruled the galaxy for so long, was a daunting task. But they all knew it had to be done. If they didn't act, nothing would change. Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice carrying authority as she spoke. "We have the support of key factions within the Council.
Some of the highest-ranking senators are on our side. But we need to move quickly.
Once the Council realizes we've escaped, they'll come after us with everything they have. We need to hit them before they can regroup." Ben watched as the Loyalists nodded, their faces grim but resolute. The time for hesitation was over. They were about to go on the offensive, and there was no turning back. Lyra outlined their plan. They would strike at the heart of the Council's power, a strategic move that would send a message across the galaxy. Their goal wasn't just to take down a few leaders. It was to shake the very foundation of the Empire. They would expose the corruption, the lies, and the ruthless tactics that had kept the Council in power for so long. "We have to do this carefully," Lyra warned.
The Council will retaliate with everything they've got. But if we strike at their heart, we can force them to crumble.
Ben listened carefully as Lyra continued to explain the details of their plan. They would use the Loyalists' networks to gather intelligence and infiltrate the Council's most secure locations. They would disrupt their communication lines, sabotage their resources, and expose the Council's hidden alliances. It was an ambitious plan, but Ben had seen Lyra work with the same determination and precision before. He knew she was capable of pulling it off.
"What can I do?"
Ben asked when Lyra finished outlining the strategy. Lyra turned to him, her eyes softening for a moment.
You've proven yourself more than capable already.
"We'll need you to help with the technical side, disabling their communication systems, gathering data, anything that can slow them down. Your skills will be critical." Ben nodded, feeling a sense of pride. He had been part of the plan from the very beginning, but now it felt real. He wasn't just a technician anymore. He was part of something that could change the entire galaxy. The idea of taking down the Council, of helping to free countless worlds from their control, was more than he had ever dreamed of. "We'll need to move quickly," one of the Loyalists spoke up. A tall alien woman with sharp features. "The longer we stay here, the more vulnerable we become." Lyra nodded.
"I agree. We'll split into smaller groups to carry out different tasks."
"The more we can spread out, the harder it will be for the Council to track us. Once we hit them, we'll have to be ready for their counterattack." Ben could feel the intensity of the situation settling over him. There was no room for mistakes. Every decision they made, every move they took, would have consequences. As the meeting ended, Lyra walked over to Ben, her face set in a determined expression. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Ben hesitated for a moment before answering. "I am." Lyra gave him a small, approving smile. "Good."
"We'll need every bit of courage we have to get through this. The next few days were a blur of activity."
Ben worked tirelessly, coordinating with the Loyalists to gather information and prepare the sabotage efforts. He spent hours in the facility's command center hacking into the Council's communication networks, planting false data, and setting up barriers to slow down their response. It was exhausting work, but it felt like the first real step in their revolution. Lyra moved with relentless energy, her presence inspiring those around her. She had become the symbol of hope for the Loyalists, and her every word carried the weight of their shared cause. Ben watched her with growing respect. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Then, the day came. They were ready. Ben stood at the command center, his hands hovering over the controls as Lyra's voice crackled through the comms. "It's time," she said. "We move now!" With a deep breath, Ben activated the systems. The Loyalists spread out, their groups infiltrating key Council facilities, disabling their systems and planting explosives in strategic locations. The rebellion was officially underway. Ben's heart raced as he monitored the progress. Each successful hit sent a ripple through the Council's forces. They were disoriented, scrambling to respond. But it was too late. The Loyalists had struck first. As the battle raged, Ben felt a strange sense of calm.
They were winning. The Council was crumbling under their feet, and there was no turning back.
He had never been part of something so powerful, so meaningful. Hours passed, and the Loyalists continued their assault. The Council's defenses were starting to collapse, and their communication lines were in chaos. The Empire, once so unshakable, was beginning to fracture. Then came the moment that would define everything. Lyra's voice came through the comms again, this time filled with a triumphant edge.
"We've done it!" she said. "The Council is in disarray!"
"It's over." Ben felt a surge of relief wash over him, but it was quickly followed by the realization that their fight was far from over. They had taken the first step, but there was still much work to be done. The Council would not go down easily. They would regroup, they would fight back. But now, Lyra had the power to shape the future. Later that evening, as the Loyalists gathered in the facility's main hall, Lyra stood before them, her eyes shining with determination. She had won the battle, but she was only just beginning the fight to rebuild.
"This is just the start," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "We've struck the Council, but the galaxy is still ours to claim.
Together, we will rebuild an empire where justice, equality, and freedom reign. We will build a new future."
The Loyalists erupted into applause, their faces filled with hope and pride. Ben stood among them, feeling the weight of their victory, knowing that the battle for the galaxy was far from over.
But now, they had a chance, a real chance to create a new world, one where the Council's tyranny would never again control their lives. And as Ben looked at Lyra, standing tall and strong in front of the group, he knew this was only the beginning of a new era.